tie-in is?
Without law, nature wouldn't be what it is.
Without law, nature wouldn't be what it is. What is the Torah? What is the law of God all about?
How to behave.
How to behave. How to live God's way in God's world. The Torah gets misunderstood all the time as a bunch of rules that God's keeping track of, and every time you break one, you get a demerit. Every time you keep one, you get a gold star. Well, you know, that's a nasty caricature. But the law of God is God's life-giving way of living. To live God's way in God's world is to have life. It's kind of like saying to a fish, to live in water is to have life. To live outside of water is to die. To live God's way in God's world is like a fish living in water. See? And so the law of the Lord, how to live God's way in God's world, is perfect. It's trustworthy. It makes the simple wise. It gives joy to the heart. See? That's the deal. Okay, so part of God who saves is the God who teaches us how to live. But He's also the God who rescues us from Egypt. So turn to Psalm 105. And there are a whole bunch of salvation history psalms. Anybody remember what is the introduction to the Ten Commandments in both Deuteronomy and in Exodus? The Ten Commandments begin with what? Before the first command, you shall no God but me, comes what? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the land of slavery. Have no God but me. See how that works? I am the God who saved you. Here's how to live. Get it? I am the God who saved you. The law begins with grace. I'm the God who saved you. Here's how to live. So it's real important to tell this and remember the saving work of God. That helps us take the saving work of God about telling us how to live God's way seriously. Okay. So here is Psalm 105, and let's read the first couple of verses down through 5 responsibly. I'll read the first part, you read the second part. Remember Hebrew parallelism, so I'm reading something, the part you read is just sort of expands on it one way or another. Okay. Give thanks to the Lord, call on His name. What He has done. Sing to Him, sing praise to Him.
Tell all His wonderful acts.
Glory in His holy name.
Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice.
Look to the Lord in His strength.
Seek His face.
Remember the wonders He has done. O descendants of Abraham, His servant.
Sons of Jacob, His chosen ones.
He is the Lord our God.
His judgment is all the earth.
He remembers His covenant forever.
The words He commanded for 1,000 generations.
There you go. Okay. Now, if you look here in verse 9, we begin. This has been introduction. Remember what God has done. Well, what has God done? If you're Israel, what has God done? And where does it start? Well, where does it start? He tells us right here in 9. With whom does God's saving act start? Abraham and Isaac. Who is Isaac?
Abraham's son.
Abraham's son. And the promises of God in Genesis chapter 12 pass from Abraham to Isaac. And from Isaac to, and from Jacob to
Israel.
Joseph. And then to all of Israel. Okay? So, He remembers his covenant forever. Verse 9, the covenant he made with Abraham, the oath he swore to Isaac, same covenant. He confirmed it to Jacob. There you go, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To Israel, Israel is another name for Jacob. To you I will give the land of Canaan as a portion you will inherit. That's salvation. Now 12, when they were but few in number, few indeed and strangers in it, they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. This is before Israel was a nation. This is while Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were wandering all over Heckenbon. They hadn't received the promise. Okay? He allowed no one to oppress them for his sake, their sake. He rebuked kings, saying, "Do not touch my anointed ones. Do my people, my prophets, no harm." Then he called down famine on the land and destroyed all their supplies of food. And he sent a man before them, Joseph. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Now where are we going?
Egypt.
We're going to Egypt. See, we're telling the salvation story of the Old Testament. The story of how God created a people for himself. Now, why does God create a people for himself? To save you through the Messiah. So this is your story. If God hadn't done this, there'd have been no Messiah. This is how God did the Messiah thing, that let you have salvation. Okay? So he sent a famine, but he sent a man before them. Joseph sold his slave. They bruised his feet with shackles. They put him in irons. They arrested him. Tell what he foretold, remember, in a dream came to pass. He told the king of Egypt to store up food for 7 years, and then there would be 7 years of famine. The king sent and released him. The rulers of the people set him free. He made him master of his household, ruler over all his possessed, to instruct his princes as he pleased, and teach his elders wisdom. So the story is unfolding. If you want to read all of this stuff, read Genesis and Exodus. That's where those stories are. It's tragic that modern Christians don't know those stories, because they're crucial to understanding who God is and what God has done. Okay, then Israel entered Egypt. What's that mean? This is the people, the heirs of the promise to Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what happened when they went to Egypt? Well, we're going to get told. Then Israel entered Egypt. Jacob, same as Israel, the people lived as an alien in the land of Ham. That's a reference all the way back to Noah. The Lord made his people very fruitful. He made them too numerous for their foes. What happened while Israel was in Egypt? They became a whole bunch of people. They made babies like rabbits. Okay? He made them too numerous for their foes, whose hearts he turned to hate his people, to conspire against his servants. And then what did he do? He sent Moses. Now what's Moses going to do for God? He's going to go to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." He sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. They performed his miraculous signs among them. Them who? Egypt. And wonders in the land of Ham, Egypt. And here now is a reflection on some of the plagues that were sent. He sent darkness and made the land dark, for had they not rebelled against his words. He turned their waters into blood, causing their fish to die. The land teemed with frogs, which went up into the bedrooms of their rulers. God's got a human sense of humor. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout the country. He turned their rain into hail, with lightning throughout their land. He struck down their vines and fig trees, and shattered the trees of the country. He spoke, and the locusts came, grasshoppers without numbers. They ate up every green thing in the land, ate up the produce of the soil. Then he struck down the firstborn of their land, the first fruit of their manhood. That's a recounting of God's action to save Israel from slavery in Egypt. You can read all of that somewhere around Exodus 7, 8, and 9. Okay? And remember, Pharaoh let them go. And when he let them go, did they just leave like a bunch of beaten, whipped slaves? No.
Oh.
No, they plundered Egypt. That's part of the story. He brought out Egypt laden with silver and gold, and from among their tribes no one faltered. Egypt was glad when they left, because dread of Israel had fallen on them. Well, think of all the plagues, no wonder. He spread out a cloud as a covering and a fire to give light at night. They asked, and he brought them quail. They asked. Actually, they whined, griped, and moaned about having no food, and they said, send us back to Egypt. Anyway, they moaned, and God brought them quail and satisfied them with the bread of heaven, which we also call manna. He opened the rock, and water gushed out. Like a river, it flowed in the desert. You can read about that in Numbers. They were thirsty. Again, they went into rebellion. God was so mad, he said he'd wipe them out. But Moses begged God not to and said it would embarrass God among the nations if he killed his people in the desert. So God gave them water from a rock.
Because God wouldn't want to.
Okay? God was worried about his reputation. For he remembered his holy promise given to his servant Abraham. Do you see how we've come around full cycle? Now we're back at Genesis 12. We started God's work of salvation in Genesis 12. We trace it through Isaac and through Jacob and through Joseph and through God's people enslaved in Israel and God's mighty acts through the plagues to set Israel free, and then plundering Egypt and taking care of them in the wilderness. And now we're back to Abraham. God did all of that because he remembered his promise to Abraham in Genesis 12. He brought out his people with rejoicing, his chosen one with shouts of joy. He gave them the lands of the nations. What lands are those?
Canaan.
Canaan. And they fell heir to what others had toiled for. When Israel got to Canaan, God said to them, you are going to drink from wells you did not dig, and live in cities you did not build, and farm on, he didn't say this, but in farm on farmland you didn't clear. God took it away from the inhabitants and gave it to Israel so that you could be saved by Jesus. Did you see?
No.
It wasn't fair. It was God's land. Israel would do well today to remember to whom the land belongs. It's still God's land. He still gives it to whom he pleases.
But they remember that he gave it to them. And they
Yes,
hang
they
on
do.
to that. Like,
Yes, they do. Okay, he gave them the lands of the nations that, and so on, that they might keep his precepts and observe his laws. Why did God give them the land? Why did God do all of this stuff? That they might live God's way in God's world. And so that out of them would come the Savior for all humanity. See? So that you and I would know how to live God's way in God's will. Get it? Okay. There are a bunch of, in Psalm 106, you can read this at home, but this is, here is, 105 is all the great stuff God did to save us and make us a nation. Psalm 106 it goes over all the same moments of history and tells how swell God's people behaved in response. It's a psalm all about God's unfaithfulness. God did this, we were crummy. God did that, we were unfaithful. God did the next thing, we were unfaithful. Okay, that's Psalm 106. So if you look, it starts off with praise the Lord, give thanks to God for his good, his love endures forever. Verse down to when we're in 6, we have sinned even as our fathers did, we have done wrong and acted wickedly. And now he's going to go back and trace the wickedness of God's people from the get-go. It starts in Egypt, then to the Red Sea in verse 7. Verse 11 is wandering in the wilderness. Verse 16 is the rebellion against Moses. Verse 19 is the making of an idol, the golden calf. Verse 24 is God asked them then into the promised land to give it to them, and they chickened out and refused to enter. Verse 28, they went in and then worshiped the idols and of the peoples that were there, the gods and goddesses. They engaged in the fertility rites. Okay, it was the revised way of worship. Have sex with somebody. Verse 32, they're disobedient.